If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking about
die for.
tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unborn.
All right. So the issue of propaganda, I think that what's so amazing about living in a world saturated with propaganda and having propaganda be extremely powerful and one of the most influential forces driving not just politics, but identity, issues of identity, conflicts, and even consumer traits is that the average person believes that they're immune or sophisticated enough to identify propaganda and immune to the impacts of propaganda. And I say all the time that propaganda is most impactful and even most harmful to the people who are so sophisticated to believe that they're above its effects or beyond its impacts. Um, in US society could not function, and I don't think any modern state, especially capitalist economy or modern so-called democratic state could function without heavy impacts of propaganda to the fact that the levels of manipulation, imbalance, economic inequality, exploitation requires in modern times much more acquiescence of the population, so much cooperation with the population, and what we don't understand because propaganda itself. And what's most curious before I even get into that is propaganda, number one, was founded by the Western Church, the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox, or at a time where where the Western world was actually literally called Christendom. And it in its earliest stages up into World War II, it wasn't even identified as something negative or inappropriate. And many academic institutions, many social scientists and political scientists would write about propaganda as being inherently neutral, and the whether or not propaganda could be deemed positive or negative is strictly based on the message and the source of the propaganda. And it was understood that propaganda be wanted to drive you to be in favor or against something, or wanted to move you towards action or inaction. And it was seen as a legitimate way for politicians and public figures, large companies, or as they were called back then, trusts, to articulate their message and move an audience. And it was just, or what we would call today, the arena of ideas. So anyway, we all know after Goebbels and Hitler and World War II, which I don't like that term World War II. I prefer to call those white murder orgies. I think we give so much weight to when white people conduct their business that we like to give heroic or at least appropriate names to things that white people do. So when you have regional or smaller conflicts with primitive weapons, it's called tribal warfare carried out by savages, warlords, and thugs. But when they engage on a industrially driven global scale murder orgy, we just have to look at it at this some great epoch in history when it was nothing more than a unnecessary murder orgy that even their best scholars have a lot of trouble explaining the origins or drives, especially for World War I, but even World War II. But I digress. So anyway, propaganda became a bad term. So even though all institutions of economic and state power continued to engage heavily in propaganda, they could no longer acknowledge that they were engaged in propaganda. So it became the public relations industry, the advertising industry, or the arena of ideas or the arena of debate. One thing you have to know, whether you are challenging propaganda, countering propaganda, or producing your own propaganda, is that the essence of propaganda is repetition. The essence of propaganda is repetition. So anything you hear repeated in society to the point where nobody questions it. We're a God-fearing nation. This is a democracy. You know, even things you agree with wholeheartedly. Oh, there's no difference between Democrats or Republicans or the liberals or the left and the right. Even things that you agree with that sound reasonable or even that harmonize with your very being. If you hear it commonly stated and never challenged, just know it has moved. That is propaganda that has been ingrained to the point of being indoctrination. And the reason why it's so effective is because sometimes there's a kernel of truth in propaganda, but what's more necessary than a kernel of truth is that it has to be rooted in or feed or reinforce one's delusions or beliefs. And so anything that confirms or reinforces your beliefs or your delusions. So whether it is the white man's burden or the Western white man civilizing the world or Africans coming from kings and queens, you know, and the noble African in our noble resistance. These are all forms of propaganda. And I am not necessarily, I'm probably lean more towards the old school that I don't think propaganda is inherently good or bad. I think it is a tool. But because my side, which I am on the ideological and aspirational left, the left is so bad at propaganda, which wasn't always the case. But the left, which is my side, is so bad at propaganda that we tend to just say, well, it's evil. So we don't have to be down on ourselves at our failures of propaganda, public relations, marketing, branding, swaying human opinion or swaying public opinion because we have the truth on our side. And we've been so comfortable for so many decades having the truth on our side, having the facts on our side, that we don't need to engage in propaganda. We don't need to sway, manipulate, or even because that's bad, you know, mass manipulation, and or even concern ourselves with public perception because we stand on the right side of history and the people will either get with our program or face continued oppression. And even as we speak that we want to liberate the people, we want give power to the people, we want to subvert the agendas of the right, of the oppressors, of the capitalist. We are more content with being right than we are with winning. I'll say that one more time. Many people on the left are more content with being right than they are with winning. But in the reality, in an existential revolutionary struggle, victory is the only morality. So, all that aside, I don't know, that's kind of a rushed introduction. Uh, Propaganda, the first thing you have to do, where my wife, who's an English teacher, she always talks about before you can manipulate something, you have to master it. And what she meant is when she teaches English or teaching writing skills, she does not allow her students to deviate from the standard writing, from the accepted standard of writing until they have shown a mastery. Once you have shown a mastery of the accepted academic writing, then you can begin to become more artistic. You can manipulate the language. You can start to use slang or misspelled words or you know, play with the verb tense or start to use what can be called what either ebonics or like I said, colloquialism. But you first have to demonstrate a mastery of what is. So if you are going to effectively engage in propaganda or counter propaganda, you first have to have a grasp on reality. You have to understand the things that are being lied about, the things that are being manipulated, the things that are being twisted and turned, you have to say, you have to have some discourse, exchange, connection to what is really real before you can begin to turn those facts, those realities, or articulate those facts or realities to a population, the masses of population, as propaganda. And moving from simply informing people or giving people the facts to allow them to make their minds up, to giving people information or imagery, sound in such a way to sway them to your side, to get them to act on your behalf, or at the very least to be neutral as you engage with your enemies. And oftentimes people want to skip over that part where we have to, at least someone has to know what's real. Again, one of the most infamous propaganda machines was the Third Reich Nazi propaganda machine. But in all that time, the inner circle of the Third Reich understood the truth of what their intentions were. As they were saying, we're saving Germany from an evil, insidious force within our. They knew that the people they were targeting did not have the power they said they had. They didn't. They knew they would say, well, Hitler, who's a World War I veteran, said that, well, these insidious Jews were the reason we lost World War I. He knew that was a lie. Or you come up and modernize it to the United States, where they were talking about Vietnam veterans came home to America and were spat upon by the hippies, the leftists, the Black Power, the socialists, the anarchists, the anti-war, pro-peace, anti-nuke people were at the airports spitting on veterans and calling them baby killers. And they put it in that movie Rambo. And they made us sympathetic, and they turned people who were international war criminals committing genocidal atrocities in the Asian subcontinent. They turned them into sympathetic heroes. They're doing the same thing with Iraqi war criminals. But the people who birthed and propagated that lie knew the truth. And they knew the truth because they were architects of that reality. So if we on the left are going to say, hey, I'm just going to use the language. We're not going to play fair anymore. Or we're going to use the, I don't like this quote, we're going to use the master's weapons against him, you know. And many people on the left are not evidence-based. They're not fact-based. They have a more fantasy or rooted in fantasy, rooted in wishful thinking or magical thinking. So we need a cold, sober, radical analysis. And by radical, I don't mean a militant. I don't mean hostile. By radical, I mean in the botanical term that gave roots to the political context of the term. Radical means understanding things from the root, from the core. And you understand things not just by their impact in terms of poverty. We want to end poverty, homelessness, police brutality, mass incarceration. That's all well and good. We want to end U.S. imperialism. But many people don't even understand where it comes from, what the root is, what the motivation is, what are the institutional, who are the individuals that sustain these things we're against. And once we have that grasp, once we have and I have to say this, and I can't say this enough, revolution is an intellectual endeavor above everything else. And if your intellectual, ideological component of your revolution is not solid, it doesn't matter how effective any other aspect is. So once we have that grounded understanding, then and only then can we engage in constructing and propagating propaganda, constructing and putting out a propaganda apparatus. And again, as we said, the essence repetition is the essence of propaganda. So if you're going to create propaganda, it is not enough to simply say, well, we want to get the word out. You need to create an infrastructure within your organization, community, people who are dedicated to articulating and mass producing a dynamic and engaging message that will proceed, that can go out, really span generations. What we're going through with this Trump administration was initiated almost three-fourths of a century ago. Or you can even go back to the New Deal. Trump is a culmination of decades of hard work by capitalists who wanted to subvert the communist revolution and even the social safety net, the welfare safety net. Trump is a continuation of Reagan. He's not some emerging thing that came out of nowhere. Trump was cultivated. And if it wasn't Trump, I mean, he's a placeholder, he's a mascot, it would have been someone else. So we're in a multi-generational struggle against well-entrenched forces. And we often engage in activism, protest, and demonstrations. And if we look at the roots of those words, a demo, an act, and a test. If you look at a demo, an act, and a test, those are all preparations. That's not really the real thing. What we have to reorient ourselves towards doing in terms of propaganda and everything else is institution building. And this is another dirty word like propaganda. Bureaucracy, infrastructures, systems, and systematizing what is happening. It is not because this is the only way to do something, but when you are facing oppression, your response, your countermeasures, by and large, are dictated. The terms of the freedom fighters are often dictated by the oppression, the nature and form of the oppression. But kind of getting back to propaganda of the state and institutions. The propaganda system in the United States is basically capitalist, imperialist, and white hegemony. And it's not white supremacist. I don't like the term white supremacy. I think it's more white hegemony. And when we understand more in looking at it as white hegemony, it's understand that white hegemony can be embraced, internalized, and advanced by anyone from any race. And it's a much broader thing where we limit white supremacists to KKK members, skinheads, and spaces where non-white people are generally excluded or unwelcome. But the white hegemonic system is multiracial. It's multi-ethnic. It involves, you know, people, queer, LGBTQAI people, going all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover. And when we understand that that propaganda apparatus is fully integrated, it's multi-trillion dollars, it's more important and takes higher priority than many of the military infrastructure and military apparatus. And they don't even, they're secure enough where they will even say, well, when we go into Iraq, we have to win the hearts and minds. If we don't win the hearts and minds of the people, then this, it doesn't matter how much ordnance, how many drone bombs, how much white phosphorus, how many assassinations, how many torture chambers we erect, if we cannot win the hearts and minds of the people. So even as powerful and I mean entrenched that the Western or the US propaganda apparatus is, they still realize if there's more work to do and it's not absolute. Now, in terms of comprehending it, there should be in a propaganda, counter propaganda, people whose role it is to assess, evaluate, study, look at the various factions, choke points, and interests involved in the dominant propaganda apparatus. Once you identify that, you can find vulnerabilities, or even more so important than vulnerabilities is areas where of neglect or oversight. Sometimes the system can get so powerful and so well entrenched that they take the position that this area, this population, or this area of thought, this school of thought is so well squelched or so well suppressed that we don't even have to give it attention. So you can operate in areas where the hypocrisy or contradictions of the system are so strong, like right now. Um, this is the first time in my relatively long life that right is no longer talking about the moral high ground and law and order. Throughout my childhood, the Republicans would talk about personal responsibility, law and order, and that they had the moral high ground. These are areas where they're vulnerable. These are also areas where counter propaganda can talk about um, everything from Trump's not conviction, but he was found liable in a sexual assault case. There are him pardoning, even their whole law and order, several rioters, um, all of the Jan 6 rioters that he produced. One thing, another part for propaganda is, when during the Jan 6 uh, riot, there was an enormous amount of human excrement in urine spread throughout the Capitol building, to where they had to call out the normal uh, teams to come and clean and preserve the monuments, the paintings, the sculptures. And they had to bring in a special hazmat team to sterilize, because there was so much human waste spread on the walls, on the paintings, inside the offices of the congressmen and congresswomen, that just normal cleaners wouldn't be allowed to go in until the place had been deemed worthy of human occupancy or action again. And it blows my mind that that wasn't seized upon, that or just by the left. Because I just would have to say that if you saw a Black Lives Matter or Antifa throwing human excrement at the police, it would be running nonstop on Fox News, just because of human beings being the evolved primates that we are. Things like that are very attention grabbing. So the right, the fascist, and I've taken to call it, because we were under United States has had bouts of fascism, neo-fascism, and Trump, what I call this era, retro-fascism or retro-imperialism. He's moving from the old school. He's moving back towards the old school imperialism. So you had imperialism and fascism, and then you had neo-fascism and neo-imperialism coming from the Clinton administration, and neoliberalism and neo-fascism and neo-colonialism. But now these are retro. Trump is taking the velvet glove off of the iron fist and showing naked raw power with no pretense of diplomacy or inclusion. So this is actually retro fascist and retro imperialist. Their movement is rife with vulnerabilities. Um, their leadership is full of malignant narcissists who have a very warped and fragile self-image, and they're extremely vulnerable. I mean, I see some leftists putting out this whole Elon is the real president shit. Elon is the real president shit. And we know that Trump is dumb and narcissistic enough for that to bother him. Or even how they're spamming. I'm starting to see Elon Musk's son had said to him, "You're not the real president, go away," some shit like that. So they basically give us enough ammo to aim at them relentlessly. But the problem is we don't have the leftist organizations, leftists as a larger community don't have enough infrastructure. We don't have the apparatus in place to run with that. We don't have the apparatus in place to put that out, and bang it. And everything from, you'll notice, from music, where it is a coordination, fashion, music, entertainment media, scholarship, peer review, legitimate scholarship, street level scholarship, barbershops, places of worship and gathering. If you have any opportunity to be around the right, you'll notice that if a message goes out, you look at the Sharia law, when they were saying Sharia law was coming to America, and they had rural legislatures and rules legislators amending constitution to say we will not allow Sharia law to come to America, no Sharia law, and they want to bring Sharia law to America. And they were saying this shit in their churches. This was on their news program. They had it on T-shirts. They had it on billboards. It just goes across every single area of engagement for the average white citizen in America. And that's what we have to erect and sustain. Fortunately, this requires a lot of resources, but the core resources is community. The core resource is community. So as we challenge, mock, demean, and attack the oppressors, the enemies, we also have to start to build up our own message and messaging. And another thing about propaganda, I know if you've been online, you've heard about these various pipelines. And they usually talk about the pipeline to the right, because propaganda is kind of like the top of the funnel. So if you have some good imaging, good branding, good catchy artists, you get some artists that is within your cause, or sensitive or responsive to your cause, that gets them. And as someone falls into that wide pit of attractive messaging, as they funnel down, that's when the message is refined, and you move from propaganda, imagery, stories, stimulating them, to educating them. And that is the process of radicalization, kind of works in a funnel. A lot of times we'll get people attracted, say, hey, I like that branding. I like how them brothers move. I like what they said about this or that. And we leave them at the top of the funnel for sometimes their whole time within the movement, until they fall out the side. Because there is no effort to identify the large number of people that are like, yeah, Black power, Black liberation, or anti-capitalist. Or, I don't have the means of securing the needs of my family. That's entering the Black liberationist or the anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist pipeline. And we, again, on the left, organizations, communities, or individuals do not have the systemized means of bringing them in. Where you get a white guy who is apolitical, and his new version of his favorite movie franchise comes out, Star Wars, and he sees a Black Jedi. He's like, well, goddamn, the Blacks are taking over everything. And that one thought, he can enter into the right-wing reactionary funnel and go from being like, I don't think the Black Jedis are canon, to blood and nation, and we need to export all the foreigners, and we need a white nationalist republic within months or weeks. And this is war. And we have to employ guerrilla tactics, because we don't have the financial backing that the fascists have, because fascists will always have more money than you, because fascism is capitalist immune system. Fascism is the immune system of capitalism. Fascism comes about when the impacts the rage, the justified rage and discontent created by capitalism gets to a point where the capitalists fear that groups can take action. So what fascism does is says, well, now we got enough people pissed off, ready to take action. We have to direct them towards other vulnerable groups. That's all it is, and that's only time fascism comes. And the fascist, and even the companies we thought were our friends, if they are capitalists, they will get behind the fascists. From Target, I don't know, these other friendly corporations. So anyway, there is work to be done. I think we've given, which I appreciate, I respect, a lot of attention and energy to the truth, the facts. But in this battlefield, this arena of ideas, the battlefield of ideology, we have to, for lack of a better term, sugarcoat, or I don't know, well, this is the United States. We have to batter, dip, and fry our ideas to make them palatable for the average person. And whenever you're putting together an action plan, don't think about the comrades. Don't think about your allies. Think about your most apolitical uncle. Think about your uncle that just wants his buffalo wings and his ball game. That's where our branding, our outreach, our messaging has to start. We have to, at the same time, deconstruct the wrong ideas and reconstruct the new ideas. I get a lot of literature, I get a lot of correspondence, I interact with a lot of people, and we love talking and preaching to the choir, and we love getting accolades back and forth with each other. And even when I'm in a public space or online and someone comes with the wrong idea or the wrong point of view, they're like, get him out of here. He doesn't know, he doesn't understand, he hasn't read the right books, he doesn't have the right ideology. But like Trump said, I love the poorly educated. And it's not enough. A lot of times, before you can educate an ignorant person, you have to inspire, motivate, or even enrage an ignorant person to put forth the unpleasant and arduous work of becoming a revolutionary. Some characteristics of propaganda is you can't be ambiguous. I'm finding a lot where people on the left, they don't want to say, well, I don't want to say I'm left. I don't want to left or right, liberal, conservative. That doesn't mean anything. I'm for justice. I just want to do the right thing. I just want to be free. Where we don't clearly define what freedom is. Amongst ourselves, we don't define or identify the state of freedom. Or we allow our enemies to be ambiguous. Yeah, we're against the capitalist. We're against the system. While they're over there and say, we are against the Venezuelan, we're against Maduro, we are against the Cuban, we are against the communists. So on the left, we need to start naming names. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the late, great Steve Coakley. He was a researcher and a scholar, and he would call people's names. We get uncomfortable with name calling, especially internally, because we think, well, if we have any type of internal conflict, we don't want to be seen as haters. We want to be positive and all that things that we've taken upon ourselves that we think make us the good guy when they do nothing more than make us ineffective. So we have to say anti-capitalist, and we are socialist. We seek to take the property and redistribute the property to these populations. We are not even, we're beyond pro-immigrant. We want to erase the borders or say, listen, no one is obligated to respect the territorial integrity of an empire. And so as long as wealth and resources can move across borders unencumbered, so should human bodies. We need to make, even if your position especially in the United States. I get into a lot of trouble here in Chicago because there are a lot of people parading as leftists or progressives or even pan-Africanists that are hostile towards the migrant community, that are hostile. I mean, even Dr. Fubar is out, or AKA Dr. Umar is out here spreading jingoistic nonsense in the name of Pan-Africanism. So we have to be comfortable with naming names. We have to become more comfortable with internal conflict and airing out dirty laundry. I got booted from a pretty prominent, I'm going to say it, Black Power Media. Well, now it's Black Liberation Media. I always got in trouble because they kept saying I was sharing their internal, you talking about internal business. No more fucking, it's the people's business. You can't say you're for the people and you got secrets from the people. And I would always say, you know, how can we be out exposing the deception, lies, and dysfunction of capitalism, the US government, the US military, multinational corporations, the NFT crypto economy? We want to expose everything and peek behind the curtain. But when someone looks behind our curtain, we want to call foul. So all that to say is no more ambiguity. Say at every opportunity who you are and what you stand for. And no weasel words directly. Socialist, anti capitalist. I am a leftist. And yes, I'm sorry. I wish I ain't left or right. That is not an option in this political landscape. If you're fighting for liberation on Mars or some other planet, but in the if you are in a world that's under the military, imperialist, economic domination of the Western powers, then you have to deal with left or right. Once they're overthrown, we can create a whole new dichotomy or or multi-state, but that's the reality we deal. So we have to start to make our language the language of the community. The terms we use, there was a time where Black people didn't want to call ourselves Black. There's a time, you know, my great grandmother, Genevieve Bowie, if you called her an African, she would feel that you would insult her. But it took repetition, which is the essence of propaganda, for us to be comfortable with identifying ourselves in a way that unites us with the African diaspora and our brothers and sisters on the continent and connects us with anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist forces across the globe in solidarity. You know, so we have to make it a priority as much as it is a priority to find out the truth and the reality and to seek justice. We have to make it to say, hey, our message, our movement, our agenda, our goals, and make them as palatable and attractive and set out with the goal of transforming people who are either hostile or indifferent to our position and move them up to enthusiastic supporters of our position, or move those who are hostile to neutral component. You have to invigorate the people. So the tactics, strategies of propaganda are available to us, and there is nothing stopping us from taking full advantage of them except our own hangups about the history and the rhetoric surrounding it. I know. I have some more in my notes, but the time is getting close. Do we have any questions, comments, or criticisms?
I would like to say something when you get a chance. I would.
Go ahead, Kiki, and from there moving forward, everyone just raise your hand and we'll do it that way.
Oh, okay, thank you. You got to teach me the etiquette. I'm not a Zoomer. but thank you. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I'm listening to you, and I'm in my mind. I'm thinking, where is the parallelism of what you're saying to the reality of what's actually going on? We're actually dealing with a convict. I mean, if it's broadcasted that this man is a criminal, what makes us think he's going to abide by the law because he's in office? And then at the same time, what type of justice are we seeking in this pirate settlement? These people make up rules and laws according to fit themselves. And we all know that because of capitalism.
I'm not familiar where I suggested that Trump will follow the law, and I'm not aware
No,
of
you
where I
didn't
say.
say follow,
Want
but
me
you
to
did tell us
respond,
the
and,
use of
and then you can
judicial
respond.
system.
Kiki, the way we'll do this is I'll allow you to have your say, and then I'll respond, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Um, Again, I don't know where. I never stated that we should have the expectation that Trump will obey the law, and I did not speak about justice because, um, from my point of view and my conclusion, seeking justice is a lost cause. You can't get justice from a conqueror. They don't have justice to give. We can't get anything from them that they don't have the capacity to give. They have our land, they have our resources. They do have the quote unquote legitimate power of the state. And so we can only get from them what they got. So I didn't recall that we should be fighting for justice from them. I do think we should be just in our interactions with each other. And I do believe that our cause is just, but I do not see the systems and institutions of capitalism and white hegemony as a source of justice. In terms of Trump being a convict, again, I did state that they give us a lot that we can work with. The rule of law has been essentially abandoned, not just by the right, but also by the liberals, the Democratic Party. When you have major party actors as high as senators asking for seeking preemptive pardons, that means the rule of law has essentially been completely abandoned. And we can use their abandonment or their retreat from the rule of law to highlight the genocidal mass incarceration system. And if we're just giving out blanket pardons, we can begin to look at that. But my position is when engaging with the state, especially through electoral politics or public policy, we have to be distant and calculated. We don't get emotionally invested, and we don't go there to seek justice. We go there to influence and extract resources. And so I'm not sure what you got from my brief discussion, but I'm not seeing where your rebuttal is rooted in or a response to anything I said.
Okay, that's fine. I just heard that you were the last portion of what you were saying. I didn't keep notes, but I do know we have it recorded, so I'll be able to go back and take a look at it. But I know the last portion of what you said definitely did settle with me as far as if we're going to try and go to a table, so to speak, to meet and try and get things going in the right direction for ourselves. I just look at it as a way of coming to this meeting to try and figure out what we are actually in agreement on as far as individual and in cities and how we're going to make a move moving forward in that sense. That's the whole point of me coming here. So it kind of caught me off guard that we was talking about Trump.
Well, let me say this. Move on to the next person. The topic, and we do have political education classes quite often, but this specific topic was built around propaganda and our ineffective use of propaganda and the fact that we're not seeing things for what they are. So Brother Kenyatta is breaking it down to us. Let me go to the next person. Comrade Rick, you had your hand up. Do you still want to make a comment or question?
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I was going to ask, but I'll take it back. Thank you.
Okay, do we have someone else that has a question? Your hand up.
This is Chairwoman Robinson, I can't find the button to put my hand up, but I do
Go
have
ahead.
a statement, I guess. So I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I pretty much agree. The question I have is, how do we get everyone to come together is the problem, because we have so many different ideologies within our own organizations, and it's kind of hard to build that collective to move forward and have the same ideas of propaganda. Um, if you could just address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, fortunately, at this stage of the struggle, we're in a quality over quantity um, position. Um, the revolution, fortunately, does not require that we all come together. Um, Dr. Ben would always talk about we need a official come together figure in terms of people would always assert that we need to come together, and it's really about the quality of it and not organizing beyond our means. So, as opposed to lamenting what we lack, which are the masses or huge numbers, it is more effective focusing on refining and more effectively applying what you have. A number as small as 4 to 5 committed people can make an enormous impact. And as those 4 to 5 people refine and expand their impact, people will begin to come in. But we have to create our projects and formations to be dynamic and to endure constrictions and expansions. So what's most important is to create methodologies, tactics, strategies that can endure uh, large numbers of interest or waning interest. But the number is not as important as the quality of the people involved in the movement, and simply orient your projects and your actions around the capacity of the people that you have at hand. And then always have a reinforcing system where you're enriching and feeding back into it. Unity is two ways. Unity, when you're arguing for unity, you have to articulate what you require from the people, and you also have to articulate and demonstrate what you offer the people who hold to the unity. I hope that answers, Chairwoman.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking it's that you have to get the people together, and you have to like now, like we're having the political education classes. If we're canvassing the communities and we're giving the community um, what they probably are not aware of, because everybody don't look at television or read the paper or whatever it may be, and you educate the community, like you're saying, and you come up with that methodology and go from there. That probably would be a good tactic.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
but I agree. Getting people together, there are several events just here in Chicago where literally thousands of African people come together for cultural events, house music, parties. So the people are already together. I mean, the job of getting people together is pretty much done for us. If we could
Mhm.
infiltrate those spaces and identify or extract individuals who are interested in doing more complex and more focused revolutionary and liberatory organizing. So,
Gotcha.
I mean, just even getting the people together, I like to take advantage of gatherings they are already where other people have done that work for us.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me add on real quick, and then I get Comrade Storm to go, and after that Sebastian, and then Win, and then Michelle. Uh, One thing I want to say, just in regards to this, what we have to realize, folks, is that, and I kind of what I gather from what's being told is that you're simply being willing to want to engage and be involved in making things happen is not good enough. We have to be willing, capable, and ready, which basically means you have to hold yourself accountable to want to grow and study and learn and make this a lifelong struggle. Too often what's happening is we're moving as when people say they want to get involved or help or do something, they're moving off their immediate emotion. And if it's your immediate emotion, and if all you're concerned, and for instance, if all you're concerned is getting Trump out of office, it's not going to change or have an impact on the condition. And Comrade is constantly using words that I think we're not picking up on: institution, architecture, infrastructure. These we refer to within the Black Panther Party, we refer to these as our continuity mechanisms. What that means, it is a complete system that is encompassing the way they operate. And when we are not aware of what we're up against, because again, like he said, we're not looking at the reality. If we're just looking at things through the lens of because I'm right and they're wrong, or I'm good and they're evil, then we're going to prevail. We're not. And we have to be strategic, and we have to be aware of the fact that there is much to learn just to engage, and you have to be willing to do so. Comrade Storm, let you go ahead.
I just want to thank you. I'm sorry I came on late. I was in another meeting, but there was a lot of good information here, even in the short time that I was present. And I just really appreciate the message and the honesty that you were sharing. And I think that you brought up a very good point about, this shouldn't be about us asking for something, because I think that again is driven off that emotionality, and then it becomes transactional. Oh, well, we're gonna boycott this until you act like you're giving us what you want, and then we'll go ahead and give in, and we'll keep giving you our money again. Or every time is, well, you gave us a little tiny bit, so then we're gonna hand you back over the keys to the kingdom, and we're gonna act like nothing ever happened. When we do have to be principled and hold our line in whatever we're doing, and keep pushing forward.
Thank you, Comrade Storm. Sebastian, go ahead.
That
Hi, thank you. So I have a question about so in terms of my experience with propaganda, like I usually see it online. I don't really see it in in real life, I feel like. And a lot of the propaganda that I've seen online, in terms of for leftists, it's um there's a lot of white settlers that are real popular. And I've found that a lot of their propaganda, it's colonial chauvinist. They'll really ignore the reality of the colonial history of America, indigenous communities, and they'll be um, reductionist as well, try to just make it seem kind of ignore racism and that kind of stuff, right? And so I was hearing you talking about inspiring people and the powers in the community and that type of stuff. And um oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so one of the things I can have trouble with is that these type of things, or so not the inspiration and that type of thing, that's good. But the economic reductionism and how white settlers, leftists will oftentimes appeal to other settlers with populism. How can we, what are your thoughts on what might be your recommendations for countering that type of leftist propaganda that is ignoring the racial history of America, ignoring the colonial history of America, to, create that inspiration and to help build that infrastructure and that type of stuff. Because I'm a white settler myself, and so I don't want to put myself front and center like these other settlers do, but at the same time, I'm sometimes it's difficult to know how to combat it. I usually just try to, I guess, fact check it and point to books. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, first of all, you can't be defined as leftist if you ignore racism and historical and contemporary racism and other components and atrocities of the dominant system. They are reactionary. They are not leftist. They are not revolutionary. So first of all, we can properly classify and label them Again, remember I said, before you can manipulate something, you have to master it if you want to manipulate it effectively. So in that argument, one thing that I find that is helpful to the white majority in the West that don't want to be, and another term that I don't like is settler. It's invader. There's no settling anywhere on this planet. The white or people who identify as white, Europeans, Westerns, have committed ongoing genocide and atrocities on every populated landmass and has polluted and intoxicated every ecosystem and biome on the face of this earth. That is not settling, that is disruption. So just the very term settler is offensive, and it is a denial of reality and history. So they are white invaders, white colonizers, but there is nothing you can find or any place you can find that they brought settlement, calmness, harmony, or the things that we associate with being settled. So just properly labeling, proper terminology. But what I articulate to especially white leftists is that their role is not to rescue anyone but white folks. The white majority is the most heavily indoctrinated and most insanely delusional demographic on this planet. The things they believe about who they are, where they come from, and where they're going, and their overall status in this world. So, what I have found is that when I don't really need a white person to know my history or to know anything, if they can just clarify the lies they have about themselves and who they are, and realize that this is an omnicidal system. We focus on the genocide, we sometimes focus on the ecocide, but this is an omnicidal system, meaning that nothing, all complex life forms and systems are threatened and being disrupted and will be brought to a halt if capitalism, white hegemony, is allowed to reach its conclusion. So, as a white person, if you could help other white people to realize that they're not here to save anyone but themselves, and like most of my people that I admire who are white, I conclude that their main goal is to humanize their own culture and to civilize their own people. Karl Marx was basically trying to bring cooperation and sharing to his people, you know, and teaching them the fundamentals of cooperation and sharing. That's it. And all these tomes and tomes, I even fall guilty myself. I got all these books by Marx, and when you bring it all down, and dialectical and historical materialism is cooperate and share. That's all the fuck it is. And he's a demon, or a saint. So teaching white people about everybody from who Karl Marx truly was to Smedley Butler, getting these white kids to stop wearing these Charles Manson t-shirts and get them to, learn about who the Wobblies, the IWWR, Sacco and Vanzetti. There are white heroes, white anarchists, white syndicalists, white communists and socialists that they can be brought to look up to, and to teach them their own radical history and their own truths, and the people that white history, the white people who are suppressed in white history, the white people who aren't in the white textbooks. I think that's one way, but the ultimate job is to civilize, humanize, and then radicalize and revolutionize your own through your own cultural lens and context.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Win.
I had a question on tips for how to prioritize palatability while also avoiding ambiguity, because I'm wondering about the apolitical often are they're conflict avoidant and discomfort avoidant, and the commitment that people need to make to endure discomfort or to endure conflict within leftist spaces seems to keep people from joining. They'd like to be comfortable. And so I'm wondering how to balance, like, how do we make discomfort and perhaps conflict palatable or attractive to people in a way that lets them know, like, this is what you're getting into, and is unambiguous in that way, but also is still attractive?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know very many comfortable people. I was born black and poor and been poor my whole life. So that concept of being around comfortable and complacent people, because what I find is most people's comfort is not even based in their material stability or even their environment. It's based on more so their warped egos. You know, for someone to be able to be comfortable and have any level of awareness of the state of the world, or even the state of their own local community, um, if they are comfortable, I'm not really sure that they lack empathy. So whatever exercises in building and expanding their empathy, or cultivating their empathy in a person, if that is possible. I know in sociopathic, psychopathic people lack the very capacity for that. But building empathy, and one time I was dealing with this extremely liberal professor who thought he had everything worked out, and he was a nonviolent and pacifist. And I simply explained to him this concept of called sterilizing distance, because what wealth allows you to do is to have a sterilizing distance between yourself and the violence necessary for your comfort. So the poorer you are, the more you have to get your hands dirty. We're very familiar with the concept of just get your hands dirty and get out there. Whereas if you are relatively affluent, you are able to have a physical and even social and even an awareness boundary between you and the mines of the Congo and South Africa, between yourself and the extraction of the oil from the so-called Middle East, or extraction in other extractive industries. You have a sterilizing distance between yourself and the maquiladoras or the other sweatshops and the industrial production. You have sterilizing distance between your chicken, your beef, and the slaughterhouses and the feedlots and the tumors and suffering of the animals. So a lot of times when people talk about their comfort, sometimes you can get things that are dear to them. If they're a railroad person, or a just a status quo American, because over 54% of U.S. Adults don't read beyond a sixth grade level. So find the things that are dear to them. Um, if they're into sports, talk about Nike and the shoe industry and the shipping lanes, how the ships are brought here, and how Michael Jordan became a billionaire. If they're into to whatever they're into that piques their interest, then you can go into and dissect and unravel the atrocities associated with those things. And as I tell people, you may not be responsible for the coltan extraction that's in your phone, but you're still obligated. So you're still indebted to these undercompensated workers, the prison industries, where that manufacture everything from clothes to circuit boards. So if you do have a level of comfort, then that also, the greater your comfort, the greater your debt to the larger humanity. So that's one means I've been able to touch people that we could define as comfortable or affluent.
Let me add on to that, and then I get Michelle to go next. One of the things that we talk about within the Panther Party is what we refer to as coping, and people tend to operate through access of consumption and numbing agents, which basically means that because we have greater access here in the United States and in European areas to consumption, to things that we can buy to basically offset the reality and offset our mental state, it causes us to actually numb ourselves to the real reality of what's going on. This is why you have to remember that entertainment was initially established from that standpoint in order to get the masses of people not to focus on politics. and to get them involved in something that will basically prevent them from being able to and wanting to improve their lives. So these are distractions. We have so much access to distractions that I think the distractions are misconstrued to be comfort. And again, if we're numbing ourselves to drugs, through television, through radio, through entertainment, through alcohol, all of these things basically condition us to maintain a what we call a level of acceptance of enslavement, of oppression. And we misinterpret that and define that or redefine it as comfort. And that's what Comrade Kenyatta is kind of basically alluding to and letting us know. So realize this, and we say this as an acronym, and I'll move on within the Panther Party. And this kind of goes back to one thing Sebastian said. I don't see when basically it was stated, I don't see propaganda. We have been basically, we don't realize what's going on. We don't see patterns. We have an acronym we refer to as TORS, which is tools of your surroundings. When we talk about that, what we're getting at is the fact that if you are not aware of how things are being weaponized against you on the battlefield of life, and you don't use it, then it will definitely be used against you by your enemy. For everything you do not recognize as propaganda, as a repetitive pattern, as he said earlier, that's being used against you, then recognize that that is your lack of awareness to what's really going on. And this is unfortunately where we find ourselves, because we're conditioned to not want to grow. We're conditioned, in fact, to look at education as a way to what? Put food on the table, get a job, and to chase a capitalistic dream. Most of us don't pick up a book unless there's a dollar attached to it. So what are we doing to ourselves as it applies to trying to engage in our own true freedom and liberation if everything that we will begin to study is either based on our emotional response or based on us having to make money? And see, we're confused on that. And I think that even goes back to what Comrade Robertson was asking about, how do you bring the people together and I would say deal with synchronized activity and direct action. We're so dysfunctional because of our uncoordinated awareness of how we have been basically dumbed down and domesticated like an animal, that we don't see what's going on. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. I was curious if there is an example of successful revolutionary propaganda, whether from very recently or from even decades ago, that feels particularly significant to you and that you believe that we ought to reference and use as inspiration for future strategy and projects. And this doesn't necessarily have to be in a US context. If there are any notable international efforts that come to mind first, like From the River to the Sea for Palestinian liberation immediately comes to mind as an example for me, as a very specific phrase that has become much more widely understood and propagated amongst people in the imperial core who were previously ignorant or indifferent to the Zionist machine. So yeah, if you have any examples, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, the RBG, Universal Negro Improvement Association, Red, Black, and Green Flag, and the Black Power Fix. Many of these images and slogans of Black Power took African people from a generation of lynching and regular bodily assault by average white citizens to Black people developing a level of hostility and belligerence, where even though we are still under relentless white assault, that it doesn't come in that form where to what our ancestors went to. I'm old enough where I very close to I have a 90-year-old aunt who spent most of her adult life under Jim Crow, that my sons is alien to them. We have a book called Without Sanctuary. So many of the much of the rhetoric, conscious and revolutionary hip hop gave book in the 90s, gave birth to the or was what they call it, symbiotic with the Black Books movement, which was extremely powerful in the 90s to endure the genocidal crack cocaine and genocidal mass incarceration complex and the resistance that came out of that. Like you said, with from the river to the sea, and the BDS movement is another very effective ongoing against Zionist genocide. The apartheid movement in the 90s with the African medallions, the Free Mandela, the way they were used um, to, unfortunately, it ended up being a double-edged sword, but to create this mythology around Nelly Mandela and a revolution in six-part harmony, or traditional African dance and African pop music, the Afro beat under initially Fela Kuti to form the movement of the people, which was later picked up and is being expanded and advanced by his youngest son. So the Afro beat and the propaganda and how that is being used to create cadres and formations and organizations and target the corruption and neo-colonial conditions of not just Nigeria, but that entire West African regions. The Tamil Tigers, which is a little more obscure, guerrilla fighting forces with the Tamil Tigers were very effective in creating a mystique and mythology around their guerrilla forces. So yeah, I mean, in fact, I can't think of any subversive guerrilla or anti-colonial movement that did not have a strong propaganda component. Now, the propaganda often gets absorbed or enveloped into the music, the arts, or the other more positive, we'd like to call it, have a more positive slant to it, like, oh, but so you will more likely hear that there's no revolution that did not have a revolutionary arts movement. But the revolutionary arts were revolutionary, subversive, and guerrilla propaganda, branding and marketing and promotion. So just about every single one of them. I mean, the Mao and his little red book, and the way the Panthers were able to use that to source that. And when um, Kwame Ture went to Vietnam to meet with Ho Chi Minh, he had a Marcus Garvey pen, a UNIA pen. So Marcus Garvey's branding, if you put out the red, black, and green, or just talk about the Black Star Line, a century later, more than a century later, it still moves people. So I think Marcus Garvey was probably the first Pan-African propagandist, and he was called foolish because he would show up with these epaulets and wear a bunch of medals, and he would crown himself the minister or president of the African diaspora and give himself titles and have these magnificent parades up and down 125th Street in Lenox and Harlem, and the dignified black leadership coming out of the Reconstruction era and coming out of Ivy League, like Du Bois would call him a foolish man and putting on a spectacle. So yeah, I mean, like I said, if you could name almost any sustained struggle, and you can find an element of successful propaganda within it. The New Jewel movement, again, probably some of the branding. I see people out today still wearing New Jewel movement T-shirts and pins in the Grenada, and that movement was obliterated by Reagan, and Maurice Bishop is still, an iconic figure. I was just in Montevideo in Uruguay, and I saw Salvador Allende shrines everywhere, you know, in Uruguay. So yeah, those are just a few, but I would have to say that I don't think there's one that I can identify that doesn't have successful propaganda. Michelle.
Comrade Anthony.
All power, appreciate it. Thank you so much for lacing us up. Just to continue to unpack this conversation, is there any language that you see in the contemporary space that is really effective in working kind of against the fascist rhetoric that we're hearing normalized in media? Is there anything right now or is there a process that we should be employing that moves beyond the study of former campaigns to develop the language that we need today to quote, meet those folks that are just worried about the wings and sports?
Yeah, I think that because of, like me, I've taken to correct a lot of fallacious terms. It's like just the term settler instead of saying invader. Um, for a good 5 years, I wrote an essay that white privilege is a myth. And it was funny because I was getting approached by a lot of reactionary and right wing media outlets that wanted to invite, because they assumed I was a black conservative, because they would read the headline or the title of the article that white privilege is a myth, and would invite me on to speak. And the reason why white privilege is a myth, because it's actually called white pathology. It's not privilege that we're observing, it's pathology. So I argue that we have to change the language. Even, no disrespect to, we just recently lost Neely Fuller, but I've always had an issue with the term white supremacy, and I say white hegemony, or the term for it took us a good generation to get away from the term black on black violence, where you don't hear that very much anymore. But that was a concerted effort. And Amos Wilson wrote the book Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamics of black annihilations in service to white supremacy. And that's probably the only legitimate use I've ever seen or read of the term black on black violence. And so we successfully squelched the racist term of black on black violence. So we, even though the media has digital or visual dominance, we connect with our people on a more intimate and direct level. So it is extremely impactful if we just would talk directly to our people when we see them regurgitating fascist propaganda, when we see them regurgitating the corporate or fascist or government narrative, to just with calmness and affection, just give them correction. And if they push back, simply to ask them to explain. Say, what is a privilege? You know, and you want to say, well, white privilege, say, well, privilege is something you give a well-behaved child, or privilege is something we would aspire to have. But I say you can give them direct examples. If I grant myself or hold within myself, due to my capacity to do violence, the majority of the resources, and to abuse and toxify other people, that's not a privilege, that's pathological behavior. Or just ask them, you look at all these white kids getting shot up in school, where's their privilege? This is a pathological condition. It's because if we call it privilege, then it's something that we will aspire to. Well, we want to be like them, we want to integrate with them, we want what they got. Who doesn't want privilege? My sons are 6 years apart, and my older son would be able to drive, go out on his own, get his own bus card, and do all these things before his baby brother could do it. He had a lot of privileges because it was something he earned, something he was responsible for. That's what privilege is something that is a reward you earn for appropriate behavior, not the byproduct of genocide and oppression. So we have to fully engage and fully utilize and begin to truly value the fact that we have this direct person-to-person human contact that can overcome Twitter or Fox News or another press release from the White House. And I think if we start to value, and even, I know this is an ugly word to the left, but if we begin to weaponize that, I think we can surpass. We've had examples of us expelling certain concepts and certain terms and definitions from our vocabulary, from the Black lexicon especially. But it has to be conscious. It can't be passive.
Lee. Go ahead and then Rick. Come right, Lee.
My bad. Trying to unmute myself. Peace and power to everybody. Very much appreciate y'all for providing this lecture tonight. So I just wanted to make a quick comment. One of the most dangerous ideas I think that are propagated today is that there's this unsustainable population growth, or that we have to control populations. And the thing is, it's our lifestyles, that are unsustainable, not necessarily growing populations. We currently have 8 billion people. They anticipate we'll tap out at about 15 before it starts to naturally recede or whatever. But a lot of people tend to just, kind of cling onto this idea and accept it wholeheartedly. And that kind of worries me, So I wanted Diallo to kind of speak on that a little bit. And also just the unsustainability of capitalism, because I think that that's the, true, concern that we should be, trying to address. Like one statistic I can give you real quick is, in regards to the climate crisis, they say like 92% of excess carbon emissions are from the global north, so that means the global south is not really a factor in that, but of course that's where the majority of people live, about 80% of the world population right now. And of course, those are the people that's going to be mostly at risk. Yeah, I would appreciate it if bro could kind of touch on that a little bit.
Well, I think you said it very clearly. I think every liberatory organization should have an ecological wing or an ecological body within, because restoring people freedom and restoring the land should be centered around restoring and building up and detoxifying ecosystem. The thing about population growth is that the fascists understand that population growth is not universal, and the population growth is taking places in Central Latin America, the African continent, and the parts of Asia that are not developed. Japan is experiencing a population collapse. Korea, the South Korea, Italy, all of Western Europe, really, even the United States, the white population has plateaued and is projected to begin to collapse. So even the concept of population growth and population explosion is racist and is fallacious. The problem is not too many people. The problem is too many rich people, or the problem is distribution, or what is called maldistribution, where too much of the wealth created by the collective of humanity is controlled and concentrated in a small oligarchical population, which, as you said, drives everything from carbon emission, private jets, and bunkers built on the side of mountains, and this insane fantasy of colonizing Mars for rich people so we don't have to preserve. But one of the biggest engines of climate change is religion. And people don't like this, but this very stupid concept that the world is just a way station and we will have eternal afterlife. I think even before capitalism, even before Western imperialism, this apocalyptic worldview and the male chauvinist murder cults of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, these male chauvinist murder cults are very much driving the warped sense of humans' place in the world and humans' obligation to the natural world. So yeah, I don't think that population explosion is a problem. It's malproduction and maldistribution. But other than that, I agree with everything you said.
So Comrade Rick is next, and it sounds like that was really your cue to come right on in, Comrade.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name's Rick. I'm a Comanche Nation citizen. First off, I want to say thank you for your words. I do want to say that I resonate a lot with you saying we should call white people invaders, right? Because when I go into like, leftist, leftist spaces like PSL, CPUSA, they even fight me when I call them settlers, right? I use the word colonizers, and they reject that. They even reject the notion that this is a settler state, or the settler colonization is still happening. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and trying to teach people about settler colonization, native issues, and decolonization. And I really do feel like the white left, or the white, quote unquote left, is like the biggest obstacle to like revolution in this country. Even though they claim to be, a proletariat or reading revolutionary theory, they're always like fighting back against the very basic principles of the contradictions of this country, on this continent. I think it's disheartening, so I want to thank you for even saying that, using the word invaders, because I really feel like a lot of people have given me shit for saying that too. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I almost got expelled. I was a political science student way back in the day when I was getting my undergrad, and I refused to use settler. And there was a lot of in terms of, I was very political correct. I was very much into political correctness, and I would put invaders instead of settlers in my essays, and I would get marked or just get papers rejected. And these are liberal and progressive professors who insisted that I call invaders settlers. And I'm pretty sure if these people they tell us are coming after us, if the North Koreans, I just love America's enemies. They just come up with the most fanciful. If North Koreans came ashore tomorrow, not one white person in this country will be confused about the difference between an invader and a settler. They only get confused when they're committing the atrocities, but when they become subject to the atrocities, find a good white liberal or progressive and tell them that Putin is settling Ukraine. And I bet you they get real clear on what a settler versus an invader is. So yeah, but you have to keep the fight because, as I said, revolution is an intellectual endeavor. If humans can't think, then humans cannot construct. And in order to deconstruct the status quo and reconstruct a just and humane society, we have to start thinking differently. So yeah, I appreciate you too as well. We just have to keep, we just have to keep banging and keep articulating the truth.
Comrade Diallo, can you make sure to give the audience some information about your stuff in terms of like the YouTube channel or how they can learn more about the work you put out?
Yeah. You can find me at Diallo Kenyatta across all the socials, YouTube and all that. It's just I typed it into, it's at Diallo Kenyatta. You can pretty much put that in and find, articles I've written and the work I'm doing. I'm based in on the South Side, Bronzeville, Chicago. But I get around a little bit, and I work with the African World Coalition, and you can check out AfricanWorldOrder.com for other projects I have going on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any more questions, comments?
I just want this is Black Papa, Brother Diallo. I'm the one who reached out to you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming in and giving us this lesson. Very insightful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, way past my bedtime.
Yeah.
Brother W.A.R was talking about our escapism. You didn't mention video games. I'm like, God, I'm glad he didn't mention video games. So,
yeah, thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria.
Right.
Yeah.
With that being said, I appreciate everyone that came out. Hopefully this inspired you to be able to stay in this and realize that we need to reformat our definitions. You know, within the Panther Party, we have what we call our 3Ds: define, develop, and defend. And if our definition is not correct and our definition came from our enemy, then it will change our perspective, and it will cause our perspective to be one that will continue to contain us in our own enslavement.
And Huey P. Newton,
Yep.
Huey P. Newton said power is the ability to define reality and have it act in a desired manner.
There you go.
Don't ever let nobody tell you semantics don't matter.